The growing trend in sports nutrition is that every athlete's body is unique. At the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, we are working to help athletes and their influencers better understand these differences so they can better fuel their bodies. GSSI has a variety of tools to accomplish this, from testing the unique attributes of each athlete to nutrition personalization programs and educational outreach. GSSI is striving to make sure athletes and their influencers are more informed about their nutritional needs than ever before. GSSI is also an educational resource for sports health professionals, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, registered dietitians and sports scientists all turn to GSSI to gain insights into the latest research and strategies that they can put to use with their own athletes. Whether it's in the lab or on the field, online or offline, GSSI is giving athletes and their influencers an invaluable look at how nutrition and hydration can change their game, help them reach their goals, and become the best they can be.
Hi everyone. Sorry for the start today. We had a few issues that I think did now. So welcome to the third edition of the GSSM Fuel School. As I always say to those of you that have the previous webinars, thank you so much for joining all again. And to new attendees, it's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. For those of you that don't know, I am Dr. Rebecca Randall. I've been with the Gatorade Sports Institute for 8 years, and I'm currently a senior science. Just like the previous, I'm going to be moderating again and asking the speakers questions. So if we would like to ask any questions, we would love from you. So please type into the Q&A box and we'll try and answer as many as possible. And before we just to give some background about GSSI, our long mission is athletes optimize their health and performance through research and education in hydration science. And we work under 4 main pillars, which are education, research, innovation, and athlete service. And these webinars are related to the education pillar with the aim to educate more sport professionals than ever. And as in person, due to challenging times, this virtual platform is a great way to provide sports nutrition presentations. Today, as always, we've got a lineup and we'll be hearing from 2 fantastic talks. And this week we're focusing on recovery and also the role of protein for recovery. Our talks will be by Coach Perez and Dr. Witter. The format is going to be the same. Each will have 20 minutes, and even though we've started later, we should have some time after both speakers have presented for some question and answers. So let's begin. As I said, our first speaker is by Coach Kale. Kale has a bachelor's degree in sports management, sports and physical education, University of Philippines. Kale is currently the founder and CEO of Kineticore and is a strength and conditioning specialist. And today, Kale is going to cover the top of sports recovery. So Kale, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you, Becca, for that introduction. So good day to everybody who's tuned in. So again, I'm Coach Kale. So my topic for today will be on sports recovery. So to start off, what is sports recovery? Next slide, please. Sports recovery is regaining a state of balance or homeostasis. So this is just getting back into the shape you've been prior to your session, practice session, or a competition. So we mainly focus on restoration and regeneration. When we say restoration, this is returning the physiological markers to its normal levels. And then when we say regeneration, this is the psychological traits or more on the mood states of each athlete. So next slide, please. So recovery, in the words of Mark Verstegen of Exos, work plus rest equals success. So we can't just keep pushing our athletes to train hard and expect them to perform at a high level during competitions if they don't get to recover. Next slide, please. Next, please. So why do we need to recover? Exercise is a form of stress to our bodies. So as mentioned, performance is equals to fitness minus fatigue. So every time we work hard, we train hard, this increases our fitness level and thus the need to train. And every time we push ourselves, this is associated with fatigue. So of course, the different levels of fatigue will depend on the level of intensity that our athletes are doing. So having said that, the differences of fatigue will also vary the differences or the speed of recovery. So next slide, please. Okay, so we have several effects of exercises, but actually before I dive into the specifics, so we want to make sure that we understand the principles of recovery in the effects of exercise. So adaptation is faster when fatigue is restored quickly. So meaning the more we train, the more we need to recover. So the less we train, the less need for recovery. And having said that, this avoids overtraining. So we keep pushing ourselves hard during practice sessions. So these intensity in our sessions increases muscle tension and muscle tenderness. It of course increases our heart rate. And in doing so, if we don't recover, we drop our performance. And the worst case scenario that can happen if we do not do recovery sessions is we get our athletes injured. Okay, so next slide, please. So these effects of exercise are fatigue. So this is basically just being pushed to the limit. Dehydration, because of course, every time we move, and of course there's heat, we sweat and we lose fluids from our bodies. Cramps are also an effect which is brought upon by fatigue and of course dehydration. Muscle soreness, so this is common as an after effect when we overload our muscles. And of course, when these other effects are into play, and again, going back to a worst case scenario, we get injured. So next slide, please. So we have several ways to recover. Our nutrition, modalities, active strategies, and hydration. Next slide, please. So we want to focus on rest. Next slide, please. So sleep is very, very important in improving our performance and of course as a tool of recovery. So I want to focus more on the adolescent age because this is where nowadays is being much, much affected. Probably schoolwork, gadgets, or I don't know, whatever other distractions these adolescent athletes have, but they need to be able to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep every night. So at this age, a research by Milosky et al. Back in 2014 said, for those adolescent athletes who sleep below or less than 8 hours a night are said to have 1.7 times of greater risk of being injured versus those adolescent athletes who are able to get more than 10 hours of sleep every night. So next slide, please. So the next way to recover is nutrition. So I won't be diving into specifics about nutrition, but my co-speaker will be the one to cover this, Dr. Oliver Whittard. So next slide, please. So I want to discuss more on the modalities that we can do. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's break it down to 3 segments: stretching, self-massage, and hydrotherapy. Next slide, please. So first off, stretching. So this is where our muscles go through a full range of motion. So here we want to promote good blood flow and of course to remove any waste products that's being collected in our muscles as we put load on. So some examples are lactic acid, heat, and carbon dioxide. So we have 2 main effects of muscles on muscles and joints. So these are flexibility and mobility. So focusing on stretching, we want to do static stretching as a form of recovery. So this is good because it's passive and this can be done again by yourself, or you can have a partner do a static stretch for you. So this can decrease muscle spasms. A good acute effect of doing static stretching is, again, it increases our range of motion. But again, static stretching is more advised to be used as a form of recovery. And of course, more on those athletes being prescribed when they get injured. So next slide, please. So the next modality is self-massage. So this is where we use several equipment. So I'm sure some or most of you have used foam rollers, massage sticks, trigger point balls. So these are some examples of self-massage tools that we can use. So this helps in hitting the trigger points in our muscles, hitting the myofascia, and of course, going deep and light onto the muscle as a form of massage. So this increases blood flow. It improves tissue quality. Blood circulation is also promoted or improved. Increases relaxation, decreases muscle soreness. And as mentioned, same as static stretches, it increases an acute increase in range of motion. So another good effect of doing self-massage or a massage, for that matter, is a good mental state of relaxation. I'm sure a lot of our athletes, and either an athlete or not, when you get a massage, it really relaxes you mentally. So this is a really, really good way to do regeneration and restoration at the same time. So next slide, please. So another way of form of self-massage is compression machines. So these are our IPCs, or intermittent pneumatic compression. So these equipment are worn on our extremities, whether it's for the legs or the arms, which leads to relaxed and loosened up muscles. Blood and lymphatic system flows more efficiently, and of course, the restoration of muscles. So again, the good thing about compression is the pulling and the pushing of blood throughout the muscles. So when we compress the machine onto our extremities, that squeezes out blood, and then when it relaxes, blood flow comes back into that muscle. So it's a good way to promote blood flow. So this is able to really flush out those lactic acid and such. So all we want to basically do is to remove metabolic waste products every time we push ourselves to the limit. So one thing that we can note is the better it feels and the less it hurts, the better the quality of our muscles and fascia. So sometimes I'm sure you guys have experienced this when you do your foam rollers. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's not. So when it's not painful, then that's a good sign. But sometimes when it's just too painful, you want to take it down a notch and find a different approach on how to do a self massage. Okay, next slide, please. So of course, another form is hydrotherapy. So this is where we use cold and heat therapy. So this increases, again, blood circulation, decreases inflammation, and calms the nervous system. I'm sure a lot of us have been into saunas or a hot bath, and every time you are in one, you feel relaxed. So this is basically what we're trying to do. So when we do heat therapy, we increase blood flow. So as we heat up or increase the heat of our bodies, that increases that opens up our blood vessels, or also known as vasodilation. So, and then on the other hand, when we do cold therapy, this reduces the body temperature and blood flow. So this uh, cold therapy closes down our uh, uh, blood vessels or vasoconstriction. So a good way to go upon it is to do an alternating approach between cold and heat therapy. So opening up and constricting our blood vessels, again, from having that good blood flow, flushes out those uh, lactic acid, carbon dioxide. So a good ratio for alternating the heat and cold can be done in a 3:1 ratio. So heat being 3, cold being 1. Or in some cases, if you're worried about overheating because you're already in a hot climate, you can do a 1:1 ratio. So if you do 20 seconds in the heat plunge or the hot plunge, you do the same with the cold plunge. So this can be done either with a pool with cold and hot temperatures, or you can just put in a big tub or some basin. You put ice on one, and then you put warm water or hotter than warm for some that you can tolerate with heat session. And then you just go alternating, especially for the legs, since a lot of sports are done standing up. So because of gravity, blood goes down, and of course, as we train hard, blood basically stays down as well. So alternating this hot and cold plunges will be able to promote a good blood flow in and out the heart. So next slide, please. So another way to recover, we have some active strategies. Next slide, please. So this is where our cross training and light activities come in. So let's start off with light activities. So this is basically any mode of exercise. This can be, again, foam rolling, stretching, a light jog, a walk, cycling, or a light swim. So any mode of exercise, even if it's the same kind of muscle groups, but at a very light intensity. So this still keeps our heart rate elevated slightly than a resting heart rate to be able to promote, again, blood flow. So as you notice, I keep saying or focusing on blood flow, because this is where we actually flush out our waste products from the muscles and put in new oxygenated blood. So these light activities can be done within a practice session. So you can do, like for example, a high intensity a 15-minute high intensity drill, and then you can squeeze in a light activity, whether it's a jog, a dynamic stretch, or a foam roll. Um, and of course, this can be done in between sessions. So if you have 4 to 5 sessions of practice schedules in a week, then you can squeeze in 1 or 2 days for light activities. So another way to do this is to also do cross training. So this is mostly done during off peak or off season. But again, I don't really recommend that we only do it off season. So cross training is good because we are able to use the other muscle groups that's not used much in our sport. So if, for example, I'm a marathoner, then I focus mainly on my legs. It'll be a good cross training for me to do swim. So this focuses more on my arms, and I'm able to use my other muscle groups that's not being used as much in my sport as a marathoner or as a runner. So doing these light activities and cross training can avoid overuse injuries, because we know that every time we use our muscles, of course, and we don't get to do enough recovery for it, this will lead to an injury, whether an early onset or a later stage of the training calendar. So it is advisable to do both in between sessions or within the session. So next slide, please. Okay, last but not least, of course, hydration. Next slide, please. So hydration is actually the easiest way to recover, whether you're a child or a competitive athlete or professional athlete, for that matter, because we have an easy marker that tells us that we need to drink. And this is when we feel thirsty. So everybody feels thirsty, and automatically we want to drink something. So normally, for an hour of activity, we approximately sweat a liter. So we want to be able to replenish what we've lost or what we've sweat for that hour. So we want to drink an approximately up to 500 ml of bottles or a liter for that hour. But you do not need to drink, the whole liter in one go. So if you have an hour of activity, you want to be able to spread that out so that you don't feel heavy as well. And of course, you don't want to, especially during practice, and those athletes training in hot climates, you have to be able to drink more often as compared to those places with colder climate, because our sweat rate will be definitely higher. Okay, so next slide, please. So having said that, it's ideal that we drink on schedule, whether it's practice or a competition day. We want to be able to drink before, during, and after. So again, during an activity, if you sweat approximately 1 hour a liter, you want to be able to replenish that liter, ideally within that hour as well. But again, hydrating before should be done smart. You don't want to just chug down a liter or a couple of liters of fluids the night before, or a few hours before training or competition. You want to be able to take smaller uh, sips or a smaller amount instead of just going at it at one go. Because if you try and chug down a lot of fluid, tendency is you're just gonna pee it out. So if you're just gonna urinate what you've just drank, then it's kind of useless in that sense. So you want to be able to again be smart about scheduling how you drink, and of course during, as mentioned earlier, and after. So a lot of athletes sometimes don't feel the need to drink after practice, but it's ideal that we do. Again, you don't need to drink a lot. 6 sips every now and then just to make sure you are well hydrated. Next slide, please. So an easy indication is to ask, what is the answer? So W, focusing on the weight. So a good indication is to check your pre-weight, pre-practice weight, and post-practice weight. You want to make sure you want to ideally stay the same weight as how you started. So if you are 150 pounds prior a session, you want to ideally stick and finish the session with 150 pounds. I still hear, or I think it's still out there, that some people think when you lose weight after an activity is that you're losing fat. That's actually a myth. It's more water weight. So again, as soon as you drink in, you're gonna regain that weight. So don't get disappointed if you stay the same weight in that session, because again, it's just water weight. Next is U for urine. So an easy indication whether you're practicing or not is to check the color of your urine. So the clearer your urine, the better. So, but of course, in some instances, the color of urine will be affected depending on the supplements that you are taking. So if you're taking vitamins normally, it's on the bright yellow. If you're taking iron supplements, it's kind of on dark orange. So if you are taking supplements, it's best to ask your nutritionist or your physician what to expect from it. So if ever you do see a different color or darker shade of color of your urine, don't panic, especially again if you are taking supplements. So moving on to letter T, thirst. So as mentioned earlier on, thirst is a very, very good indication. But when we feel thirsty, that is actually an indication that you are already dehydrated. So as much as possible, you want to avoid being thirsty. So again, as mentioned, you don't need to drink a lot. You just need to be smart about drinking, taking smaller sips every now and then, scheduling it accordingly. But you don't want to feel heavy, of course, during your practice and competition. And that's why you want to be able to take smaller sips. So next slide, please. So an easy computation for the weight to check if you're being rehydrated well is if you measure again 150 pounds as a during your pre-exercise, and then you did your post-exercise body weight and it dropped down to 147.6 pounds. So we want to get the difference of that, divide it to your pre-exercise body weight, and of course multiply that by 100 to get the percentage, and that gives us a 1.6% dehydration. So we want to be smart about this. We don't want any form of dehydration, so we want to bring this down as much as possible. So next slide, please. So what should we drink? Next slide, please. So we want to choose a sports drink that has flavor so that you'll be able to drink more, so that your palate is or your taste buds will be able to take it in. If the flavor is good, tendency is you drink more. So uh, because if you're able to choose a flavor, you're able to rehydrate more. So next is to replenish, because when we sweat, we lose our electrolytes. So we want to choose a sports drink that has electrolytes. These electrolytes are our salts in our bodies, and it's crucial that we want to make sure that we replenish it and not drop it to a dangerous level. And of course, you want to choose a sports drink that has carbohydrates, because as we practice or as we train, especially at a high intensity, we consume our carbohydrates, and we want to be able to refuel those carbohydrates. Next slide, please. So if you guys have any more queries and to get more information, just check out the slide. You can log into this one and check out more advice, and or you can actually get more answers to your queries. So next slide, please. Again, thank you for listening. I am Coach Kale Alvarez. Hope you guys are able to get some tips on how to recover properly. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thanks, Sale. You definitely covered a lot of areas of recovery. Also, just like to alert people to the other webinars that we've had. There was one that was specifically on hydrogen. You can find that on the webinar one on YouTube. And definitely like that, everybody will have a different individual hydration depending on their sweat rate. And also that we can expect a little bit of hydration, but it's all what we can really tolerate. So check out that first webinar and care so much in what you've just come. There's a lot of questions come in. We are really tight on time, so we're going to move on to our next talk by Dr. Oliver Witter. Oliver has a BSc in Sport Science and MS Physiology and a PhD entitled Responsive Muscle Protein with Exercise and Nutrition. Oliver was a lecturer at the University of Stirling before joining King's College in 2019, where he is a senior lecturer at exercise and nutrition. Yes, but Oliver is a keen player and keen runner. Today, Oliver is going to talk to us on protein for recovery. So, Oliver, the stage is all yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Rebecca, and thanks for this opportunity to deliver a brief overview regarding the role of protein nutrition in promoting exercise recovery in athletes. By way of introduction, the importance of protein nutrition for exercise recovery is perhaps best introduced more from a clinical perspective by establishing the functional roles of proteins and by extension dietary protein intake in human physiology. So as a fun fact, about 45% of the human body is made up of protein. And the primary functions of proteins in the human body relate to 7 main roles, including structure, with collagen protein providing the tensile strength for several tissues, including bone and skeletal muscle. Movement, with the muscle proteins, actin and myosin primarily responsible for muscle contraction. Antibodies are made up of proteins which are designed to fight infection and therefore immune function, particularly when challenged with high intensity exercise and training. Proteins play a role in transport, since hemoglobin is a protein that carries oxygen around the body. Hormones and enzymes are proteins that regulate all biochemical reactions that fuel our body's metabolism. And proteins also act as cell signals or traffic lights that direct physiological adaptations to exercise and nutrition. And it's also worth noting that protein can be oxidized to generate energy during exercise, although its contribution is minimal compared with carbohydrate or fat sources. In terms of structure, proteins are made up of amino acids that are nitrogen-containing organic molecules. And when amino acids bond together in a chain, a protein molecule is formed. And it's the specific sequence of the amino acids which determines the type of protein that is formed. So analogous to how letters fit together to make up a word. With exercise recovery typically defined under the umbrella of, firstly, ensuring the athlete remains healthy, second, ensuring the athlete achieves a consistent performance over the course of a competition or a season, and finally, ensuring the athlete avoids injury, sports nutrition has typically focused on 4 interrelated components of recovery, namely the 4 R's of rehydrating, refueling, repairing the working muscle, and also remodeling muscle tissue for adaptation. And protein nutrition plays a role in all 4 components, particularly the repair and remodeling of the muscle that provides the focus of this talk. Other roles for protein in exercise recovery relate to injury management with a specific role for leucine, immune surveillance, and also sleep quality. A key component of muscle remodeling process relates to muscle protein turnover and the synthesis of and breakdown of muscle proteins that can be crudely categorized as myofibrillar contractile proteins or the energy producing mitochondrial proteins. And of course, a source of dietary protein derived amino acids is crucial to stimulating muscle protein synthesis and by extension the remodeling of muscle proteins. So what protein recommendations exist for muscle remodeling in athletes? Well, I think it's worth highlighting that it's widely recognised that optimising protein recommendations for muscle remodeling is more complex than simply recommending a total daily protein intake. Instead, multiple factors, including the per meal dose of protein, the source of protein, the pattern of protein intake, so how protein is distributed throughout the day, the timing of protein ingestion in relation to the training session and or other nutrients, as well as the co-ingestion of other nutrients, are all known to influence the utilisation of ingested protein for muscle protein synthesis and therefore the remodelling of new muscle proteins, and as such should be considered alongside the total daily protein intake when devising protein recommendations for athletes. Given this understanding, the most important factor that determines the magnitude of the muscle protein synthetic response is the amount of protein consumed in a single serving following exercise. In terms of optimising the dose of protein to consume in any given sitting, we can refer to a series of dose-response studies that have plotted the response of muscle protein synthesis, both at rest and in response to exercise, to increasing doses of ingested protein in trained young men. In this study, we utilised a single leg resistance exercise protocol with leg press and leg extension, so one leg exercised and the other one rested, and we demonstrated that muscle protein synthesis, shown on the y-axis here, so the ability to stimulate the synthesis of new muscle proteins, increased in a linear fashion with increasing doses of whey protein up to a dose of 20 grams. And then there was no further stimulation of muscle protein synthesis with the ingestion of 40 grams of high quality whey protein. Instead, the 40 gram dose stimulated non-anabolic processes such as phenylalanine oxidation, shown on the left, and also urea production rates, shown on the right. And the same finding was reported in a similar study that characterised the dose response of muscle protein synthesis to ingested egg protein in resistance-trained young men, this time with a bilateral leg-only resistance exercise protocol, so both legs exercising. So we concluded that a protein dose of 20 grams is optimal to stimulate a maximal response of muscle protein synthesis during exercise recovery, at least with leg-only exercise. In terms of practical application, the question we always get asked when we present these data is what influence does individual body mass, or more specifically muscle mass, have on the recommended protein dose to consume at each meal sitting? In other words, is the recommended protein dose for stimulating muscle protein synthesis the same for the 110 kilogram American football on the right hand side of the slide, the 80 kilogram soccer player in the middle, or the 60 kilogram volleyball player on the left hand side? To address this question, led by Dan Moore, shown on the right hand side here, we retrospectively analysed a series of dose response studies in young adults using what we call breakpoint analysis, so a statistical analysis, and revealed that the relative protein dose necessary to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis was between 0.25 and 0.3 grams per kilogram body mass per meal. So for the 60 kilogram female volleyball that you saw in the previous slide, 0.3 grams of protein per kilogram body mass per meal serving equates to around 18 grams of protein. In contrast, for the 110 kilogram American football player, 0.3 grams per kilogram body mass equates to around 30 grams of protein in each meal sitting. Another key factor in terms of optimizing protein recommendations for muscle remodeling relates to the type or the source of protein chosen. And it's understood that the interaction between three key factors determines the potential of a protein source to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. First, as shown in the red circle, the digestion of the protein source determines the bioavailability of amino acids as substrate for the synthesis of new muscle protein, and also the rate at which these amino acids appear into the circulation also appears to act as a trigger, at least after exercise, for stimulating the muscle building response. The second factor in blue relates to the protein source must constitute a complete profile of all 9 essential amino acids, of which a high leucine content, as shown in the green circle, is necessary for a maximal muscle building response. And this brick wall or building site analogy quite nicely illustrates how important the essential amino acid profile and leucine content of the protein source is for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. So muscle protein may be thought of as a brick wall on the right hand side of the diagram, and amino acids as the individual building blocks necessary to build the brick wall or the Lego wall in this scenario. And each type of wall requires a particular arrangement of these bricks. Certain types of bricks, primarily the non-essential amino acids, are always lying around and about at the building site. So these are the bricks shown at the bottom of this slide. However, the wall can only be completed if other bricks, namely a full complement of essential amino acids derived from dietary protein source, are transported in from outside the building site, as shown by the truck at the top of this slide. The mTOR pathway, or mammalian target of rapamycin complex 1 pathway, may be thought of as the builder that puts the bricks together to form the wall, and leucine may be considered a special brick. It is necessary as part of the wall, but it also comes as a pot of coffee that can stimulate the worker into faster and more effective wall building. So if the truck delivers a protein source constituting a full complement of all essential amino acids, including a plentiful supply of the red brick, leucine, the brick wall will be built effectively and efficiently. This next slide characterises the differences in amino acid composition of various commonly consumed protein sources, emphasising differences in the essential amino acid content and also the rate limiting amino acids. Animal proteins are shown in red and white on the left hand side of the figure, and plant proteins are shown in green. And as you can see, the total essential amino acid content of animal-based proteins typically exceeds that of plant-based proteins. Indeed, whey, milk, and casein are the only protein sources with a higher constituent essential amino acid composition compared with human muscle itself. Moreover, animal-based protein sources typically boast a complete essential amino acid profile, i.e. containing all 9 essential amino acids, whereas most plant-based protein sources are deficient in at least one or more of the essential amino acids, usually lysine or methionine, which is represented in the black text on the diagram. As a general rule, the leucine content of animal-based protein sources is typically greater than plant-based protein sources, although there are some exceptions to this rule. So, whilst it's clear that animal and plant-based protein sources differ in terms of constituent amino acid profile, the key question is, what's the difference between protein sources in terms of capacity to stimulate muscle protein synthesis during exercise recovery in athletes? Well, the majority of published studies that have directly compared the capacity for animal and plant-based protein sources to stimulate muscle protein synthesis during exercise recovery have compared dairy proteins with soy proteins. And these are results from this first study in resistance-trained young men in which the ingestion of 18 grams of skim milk after exercise was shown to stimulate a 34% greater response of muscle protein synthesis compared to 18 grams of soy protein milk during exercise recovery. The greater anabolic response to milk compared to soy ingestion was likely mediated by several factors, namely the greater total digestibility of the protein, the superior amino acid profile, and also the leucine content of the milk, and also the higher leucine content of the milk. But also, this study by Tang et al. On the right-hand side provides evidence that the whey component of the milk appears to be primarily responsible for this greater anabolic response to milk versus soy protein. So, based on these data and another study also with casein, which has been shown to present a greater response of muscle protein synthesis with casein protein compared to wheat. The general consensus is that for animal proteins, wheat and hemp would, when combined, would make sure that both the lysine and methionine content is of sufficient level, and equally pea combined with corn and potato combined with brown rice will also have a complementary effect in terms of ensuring sufficient lysine and methionine is met with this combination. At the risk of opening a can of worms, a similar gap in knowledge exists for insect-based sources of protein, and not to put you off your breakfast, lunch or evening meal, depending on where you are based in the world. Based on the amino acid profile, beetles, ants and termites appear to be promising insect sources of protein. In terms of protein timing, there's recent evidence that spacing the daytime distribution of protein evenly throughout the day can enhance the muscle remodeling response during exercise recovery. And in this study, on the left-hand side of the slide, both the unbalanced and the balanced group consume 90 grams of protein over the course of a 12-hour day. The unbalanced group skewed the majority of the protein to the evening meal, whereas the balanced group distributed protein evenly between meals as 3 equal 30-gram doses. And as you can see, muscle protein synthesis rates over this daytime period were greater in the balanced group compared to the unbalanced group, suggesting a simple strategy to optimize protein nutrition for exercise recovery, i.e. simply spacing that protein evenly throughout the day. And conceptually, if we look at the right-hand figure, a maximal response of muscle protein synthesis was achieved on only one occasion during the unbalanced condition, whereas a maximal response of protein synthesis was achieved on all 3 occasions of feeding during the balanced protein pattern group. In addition, if we look at the right-hand side of this figure, there's also been interest in the role of bedtime protein feeding on muscle remodeling. And this interest stems from the idea that the overnight period is associated with a state of negative muscle protein balance, and therefore represents an opportunity for the athlete to promote muscle remodeling during exercise recovery. And there is scientific evidence to support this notion, with protein ingested following an evening exercise bout and immediately before bed was shown to stimulate a greater response of muscle protein synthesis during the overnight recovery period, as shown by the left-hand figure, that translated into greater improvements in muscle mass over a period of exercise training, as shown by the right-hand figure. So some evidence here that of another strategy whereby bedtime protein feeding may be effective in terms of promoting muscle remodeling. So the 4 take-home messages in terms of protein nutrition for exercise recovery, in terms of maximising protein remodeling, are first of all to target a protein intake in the region of 0.3 grams per kilogram body mass during each feed to maximise this muscle remodeling response. The second take-home message is to prioritise high-quality protein sources that contain a full complement of all 9 essential amino acids, including a high content of leucine. The third message is that a vegan diet is compatible with muscle growth, but this will require additional nutrition knowledge, particularly with regards to ensuring sufficient lysine and methionine is consumed within that vegan diet. And finally, it's important to distribute protein intake evenly throughout the day and also consider a pre-bedtime feed. With that, I'd like to finish by thanking the team at GSSI again for this opportunity to present this talk, and I'll welcome any questions that you may have in the audience. Thanks very much for your time.
Ollie, it's really interesting what you say about balancing the protein over the day, because I think we do naturally maybe just eat more of our protein towards the latter part of the day. So it's really a good take. We should really balance that over the period of our day. That are already over them, but I'm just going to use the time, if you don't mind, and just ask a couple of questions. Those that we don't get asked, speakers, if you wouldn't mind just following up with some of the answers, we could probably publish them out on the Facebook page or on YouTube. So I'll just ask a couple. Kale, a question for you. How immediate after exercise should you apply like massage and the hot and cold therapy? So how soon after should we apply them?
Okay. Any kind of active recovery or form of massage can be done depending on the intensity of the session, and of course, some athletes choose to do it right after a training session, self-massage, or they have their physios muscle do a massage, and then they go straight into hot and cold plunge. And then, but if you are going to do such recovery tactics, you want to time it properly in the sense that you do not do it a day before, because that's going to just bring you down. That's going to put your body in a too relaxed, and you'll be having difficulties trying to exert or to get power for that competition day. So yeah, at the very least, 2 days before a competition day.
And I guess sort of individual to what else you've so it's probably a bit of for each athlete, it could be individualized. We do have audio connection. I'm sorry that we've had it the whole of today, but I'm gonna try some more questions just before we finish up. Ollie, just a question. I know that there's some research now, the heat, the cold therapy and muscle protein synthesis, not something that I'm overly familiar with, but I wondered if you could give your point of view on that.
Yeah, it is new research that's just come out in terms of impact of muscle temperature of stimulated protein synthesis. I would add it quite to comment on, just because I think it's just a silly. I think it's a very novel piece of work that's come out, and I think that before we make any kind of recommendations, I think it's really important for follow-up studies conducted on that topic to, in certain scenarios, to do we medical recommendations based on a single thing. So I would say it's really interesting, but we certainly need more to see whether that there is an impact in terms of changing muscle temperature on muscle synthesis.
Great. So as it stands, we just need a bit more before we can make recommendations from that research. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Another question from you. You said that adolescent athletes should have between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. Could that be divided up, or do people need to have that block amount of time to sleep?
Well, if that's going to be in the evening, you want to be able to get a full 8 hours of sleep at least, and then you can take an extra hour of naps in between the day, depending on, of course, the intensity of the practice sessions. But ideally, you want to get that 8 hours of sleep every night.
And I know that we've seen it with athletes that they nap too close to their bedtime. They can't sleep well enough, so also need to avoid doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe just one last question, as we are now over time. A lot of the attendees on the call might work with younger athletes. I know, like, protein lines for children could be a whole nother topic, but maybe you could give just like maybe a top point of view on team for athletes.
So, as I've alluded to there, it's a big and a top is getting a lot of attention in terms of protein recommendations for younger athletes, particularly in adolescent athletes, who obviously go in growth spurt scenario. And one of the drawbacks of the research is ethical reasons, at least from a muscle recovery, is that unfortunately you can't take muscle biopsy from children for ethical reasons. So the information that we have is based on whole measurements, but the evidence that we should be increasing the protein recommendation above the current RDA, which stands at 0.8 grams per kilogram body mass per day. Some strong evidence that for a growing young athlete, we need to be quite in excess of that, a good in excess of that. And essentially, these similar principles in terms of there's evidence that distributing intake can also be advantageous to adolescent athletes. That the source of protein may also have an impact, or remodeling, and certainly per meal needs to be up that 0.3 grams per kilogram and slightly higher. So it is a big area. We're very much in the early stages, but yeah, it's really clear that protein is important for muscle recovery in adolescent athletes.
So maybe we'll get you back something to tackle that topic. You've just signed just there for that one. We're 10 minutes past already, and we've had loads of questions. Kay, wouldn't mind if I come out to you, if you could give your answers to them out to the people that have asked them, and would just like to say thank you for the time that you've taken to contribute to the GI Fuel Schools. I know we had a few issues this morning, but we've done it and we've got there, and it's been great to listen to you both. So thank you so much. Just before, just to highlight that we are going to be continuing the Fuel School series, as we will be doing these every 2 weeks. Our next will be on the 8th of September, and it's on nutrition and nutrition for footballers. So please join, click the link, come and join us, and we've got two more great speakers. So we'll say today, thank you, Carol, and we'll all meet again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.